I finally broke down and decided on a light for this 73 CT175, and this is it. I ordered this off of eBay, and initially when I got it, it appears to be pretty decent quality. I know that when you order stuff off of eBay, you can get some real junk. The bracket that comes with this seems really strong. It's actually surprisingly thick, and it would be very easy for me to take this light as is and mount it to the fender like so. But I'm not a real big fan at this point of drilling holes in the fender, and I don't think that I'm going to need a license plate for this bike. I don't know that I'm actually going to register it with a license plate. So my plan is to mount the light off to the side here. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to cut a new piece of metal, and I'm going to use this original bracket as a template. Essentially, it's going to be like this without the license plate holder. I'll use these holes, and I will just re-drill the holes to change the orientation to hold the light. So let's take this light to the bench, and we'll talk about a few of the details. I've got the light disassembled. I wanted to show you some of the components. First off, we have the bracket. As I mentioned earlier, that bracket is pretty solid, and I'm pretty impressed with this. It's got really nice clean edges. Everything looks good. This light comes as a 12-volt system, which means it's a dual filament 1157 bulb in there. You have 3 wires. One of them is a ground, one of them is the tail light, and one of them is the brake light. This light is held in place to this bracket with these 2 bolts. They seem to be pretty high quality, nice fine thread bolts. And there's a rubber cap here that fits over the back to kind of keep the elements out of the light. The bike that this is going on is a 6-volt system, so I've replaced this bulb with the 6-volt equivalent in here. Now, a couple of things that I struggled with initially on this light. As I first got it, I tested it, and I simply took a 12-volt battery charger, hooked up the negative to one post, hooked up the positive to each one of these wires, and when I did that, I had a tail light, but I didn't have the brake light filament lighting up. I tore this apart, and it turns out that this red wire was completely disconnected from the brass post on the underside of this pressure plate. If you look at this bulb, it's got 2 spots where it has to make contact. One of these is for the tail light, and one of those is for the brake light. So I didn't have contact there. I took and resoldered the red wire back into its post, and while I had this apart, I put some solder on the blue post. So now I've got good connections there. I will say that this pressure plate moves around a little bit. Normally that should be keyed to this slot so that it won't twist when you put your bulb in. Unfortunately, it doesn't, and so I have to kind of move that pressure plate around to make sure I get good contact with that 6-volt bulb that I have in here. The other thing that's a little bit frustrating is the male connections on the wires here do not fit the motorcycle. Now I could easily blame that on the motorcycle and say that's just a fluke on the bike. But I have a lot of bikes around here, and these are too small for all of the bikes that I have in the shop. So I personally think that's a manufacturing issue. I suspect that all of the other bikes use a larger male-female connection. But that's not too big of a deal. I'm just going to cut those off and replace them when I get ready to wire this up. So the next thing to do is really just to build this bracket. This bracket is going to sit sideways so that it extends out, and I'm going to use this original as a template and cut the new one out of 1/8 inch aluminum. I've finished building and installing the new bracket for the taillight. This is just made out of 1/8 inch thick aluminum plate. It's simply a copy of the original taillight bracket, but I built it so that it can sit off the side of the fender. I've done a couple of things to the light off camera. One thing I did was removed the original male connectors that were on the ends of these wires, and I've spliced a longer piece of the wire onto the taillight so that I can reach the wiring harness that sits up underneath the seat. Now really the only thing to do is to start threading these wires and get this taillight installed. We'll put some new male connectors on the end and wire this up. I'm not a big fan of these crimp-on fittings, and this one already is going to cause me some trouble, so I need to get rid of that insulation. I realize that after that's been squashed like that, it's not going to fit down inside of that wire harness, so I got to get rid of that. And then I'm going to come back through and add a dab of solder to each one of these connections just to make sure that those don't come apart. Now that we've got all the wiring put together, I'm just going to test these out to figure out which one of the leads is the tail lamp and which one is the brake. So I've got a 6-volt charger hooked up and got the black wire hooked to the ground, and this is the blue wire, and this is the red wire. So it looks like the red wire is the brake light and the blue wire is the tail light. Now I just have to match those to the wiring schematic of the bike, and we're done with the tail light. So in the wire bundle here underneath the seat, we have a brown wire, which is the left signal, green wire, which is the right signal. We have a yellow wire, which is the brake light, a blue wire, which is the tail light, and a black wire, which is the ground. We're not going to use these signal lights right now. We're going to connect the red wire from the tail light to the yellow wire here. we're going to connect the blue wire from the tail light to the blue wire here, and we're going to connect the black wire from the tail light to the black wire here.